Morning light touched the red dust of the small border town. The air was dry, the kind that clung to the throat, and the sound of low voices filled the market square. People had gathered for what they called the auction. To them it was a trade like any other. But to Clara Monroe, it was the last piece of her freedom being sold away. She stood at the edge of a wooden platform, wrists tied with coarse rope. Her dress, once white, had turned gray from travel and tears. She kept her eyes on the ground, though she could feel the crowd staring. Some looked curious, some looked cruel, and a few looked too tired to care. The man who ran the auction was shouting about her as if she were a mule. He said she was young, obedient, and healthy, except for one thing. He said she was infertile. The word rolled through the air and landed hard on the ears of everyone listening. A few of the men laughed. A woman holding a baby shook her head as if pitying some small animal that would never reproduce. Clara felt her face flame with shame, but she did not make a sound. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than speaking. Across the square, Eli Barrett tied his mare to a post and stepped down. He was tall and quiet, with a day's worth of dust on his coat and sun-worn lines at the corners of his eyes. He had come to town for a wagon wheel and feed, not for people. Still, when he heard the auctioneer's voice rise, he turned. At first he thought the woman on the platform was another servant gone astray. But then he saw how she stood, shoulders straight even as the rope pulled against her wrists. There was pride left in her posture. It almost hurt to look at her. People whispered that a barren girl was bad luck on a ranch, that she would curse the land and dry up the well. "We'll find you some work in the morning." She nodded again and waited for him to show the way. Inside the bunkhouse, light from the doorway fell across her face, and he saw how pale she was. She looked tired to the bone. He left her there with a blanket and stepped outside to breathe the night air. The stars were sharp and clear above the roof. Somewhere an owl called. He told himself he had done something practical, that the ranch needed a cook and a cleaner. But when he closed his eyes that night, he did not dream of work or weather. He dreamed of a woman with storm-gray eyes standing on a wooden platform, refusing to bow her head no matter what the world called her. And the next morning, when the sun rose over Barrett Ranch, something in Eli Barrett's life had already begun to change. The next morning, Clara woke up to the smell of hay and strong coffee. The bunkhouse was quiet except for the faint creak of wood and the wind against the shutters. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and she remembered the auction, the man who bought her, and the ride through the wide, empty land. She sat up slowly. The bed was rough, but clean. Her hands were sore from the rope, yet for the first time in years no one shouted at her to move faster. Outside, Eli was already working. She saw him through the small window, lifting a bale of hay, the early sun catching the dust around him. Looked strong and serious, the kind of man who spoke only when needed. Clara pulled on her worn shoes and stepped outside. The air smelled like grass and smoke and something new she could not name. Eli turned when he heard the door open. "Mornin'," he said. His voice sounded deep and sure. "You can eat inside." "The stove's still warm?" She nodded and went into the kitchen. The table held coffee, bread, and beans. Everything looked plain and honest. She ate quietly while Eli finished his chores. When he came in, he placed his hat on the chair and poured himself coffee. "I was told you could cook," he said. "If you can, there's plenty to do here. You can pay a little, and you'll have a roof." "I can cook," Clara said in a soft voice. "And clean." "Then that's set." He gave a small nod. They spent the rest of the day apart, but within sight of each other. Eli repaired the fence along the south field while Clara washed dishes, swept the floors, and tended to the chickens. The hens followed her like children, clucking and pecking near her feet. She smiled for the first time in a long while. No one at the ranch seemed to fear her or mock her. Even the horses at the edge of the barn came closer when she passed. In the afternoon, Eli came by the barn and saw her standing near the stall of a nervous mare. The animal had been restless for weeks, kicking and biting at anyone who came close. Now the mare stood still, ears forward, listening to Clara's quiet voice. "How'd you get her calm?" Eli asked. "I don't know," Clara said. "She was just scared. I told her she's safe here." Eli watched, speechless for a moment. The mare leaned her head against Clara's arm as if she understood the words. Something about the sight stirred him. For years he had lived alone with his land and his silence. No one had brought gentleness into that space until now. That evening they shared supper on the porch. The air was cool, and fireflies floated near the fields. Eli handed her a bowl of stew and a piece of bread. She thanked him and ate slowly, savoring the food and the quiet peace around them. "You were far from here before, weren't you?" he asked. She looked down at her bowl. "Yes, another place bad." Her voice was low. "Yes." He didn't ask more, and she seemed grateful for that. Instead, they watched the dusk settle over the hills. The sound of crickets filled the stillness. Clara lifted her face to the sky. "It's beautiful here," she said. Eli nodded. "It's lonely too." "Lonely is not always bad," she answered. "It can be quiet enough for healing." He looked at her then, really looked. The wind lifted loose strands of her hair, and her eyes caught the last light of day. He thought she looked like someone pieced together from broken parts, yet still shining. That night, Clara stayed awake for a long time in her small bunk. She listened to the coyotes in the distance and the rustle of the horses outside. Her thoughts drifted between fear and hope. She had learned not to trust the calm because it never lasted, but something about this ranch felt different. She could breathe here. Eli lay awake too, thinking about the strange quiet that had settled over his land since her arrival. The horses were calmer. Even the air felt softer. He told himself it was just chance, yet a whisper inside him said it was something else. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Clara cooked and cleaned, sang under her breath as she worked, and cared for the animals as if they were children. Eli spent long hours outside, but always found a reason to pass by wherever she happened to be. Sometimes he caught her humming a tune he didn't know. It made the world seem less heavy. Word spread to the nearby town that the Barren girl was living on Barrett Ranch. Some laughed. Some said Eli was foolish. But when neighbors came to borrow tools or buy feed, they noticed the place looked alive again. The fields that had been struggling began to green. The sick colt that everyone thought would die was running strong beside its mother. People whispered about luck, about strange blessings, about the girl who could not have children but somehow brought life wherever she went. Clara heard the talk, but said nothing. She only kept working. And Eli, though he did not believe in magic, began to smile more often than he realized. The days stretched long and calm across the ranch, and both of them could feel deep down that the quiet between them was slowly becoming something tender and rare. The sky had turned the color of iron, and a chill hung in the air. Clara was by the barn, brushing the coat of the old mare she had calmed weeks ago. She looked peaceful, Yet Eli felt a weight pressing behind his ribs, as if something was about to change. He had grown used to her presence. Every day since she came, his ranch had felt different. The animals were calmer, the land greener. His evenings no longer stretched into silence. Sometimes she would tell him small stories about her childhood, careful never to say names or places. He never asked more than she could offer. At that morning, he saw a shadow of worry cross her face, quick as a bird's wing. By noon, a rider appeared on the road, a man in a black coat with a satchel over his shoulder. He rode straight to the porch without a word of greeting. Clara stiffened when she saw him. Her hands froze on the brush and turned pale. Eli caught the fear in her eyes before she could hide it. The man dismounted. "I am Dr. Lowell," he said in a voice too smooth to trust. "I have come looking for the woman you've purchased in town." Eli's jaw tightened. "What for?" The doctor looked past him toward Clara. "I came to speak of her condition," he said. "The townsfolk may think she was born barren, but that is not true." His words made Clara flinch. Lowell smiled thinly. She belonged to a wealthy landowner to the south, a man who dealt harshly with anyone who crossed him. Her breath came short, and she stepped backward until her back touched the barn wall. Eli looked at the doctor, anger flashing in his eyes. "You did that to her." "I was forced," the man said quietly. "I regret it." "Leave," Eli said. His voice was sharp enough to cut through the rain. The doctor hesitated but saw no mercy in Eli's eyes. He turned his horse and rode away without another word. Only when the sound of the hooves faded did Eli turn to Clara. She was trembling. He reached for her, but she pulled away. "Do you see now?" she whispered. "Why they called me unfit? Why they sold me like broken stock?" Eli shook his head. "You did nothing wrong." Her voice cracked. "I am not whole." He tried to speak, but she turned and ran into the storm. The wind and rain swallowed her small figure as she crossed the field. Eli grabbed his coat and followed her. The ground was slick, and the sky roared with thunder. Shouted her name, but the wind carried it away. Clara reached the old chapel near the edge of the property, the one no one used anymore. She pushed open the door and sank to the floor, shaking and cold. The roof leaked in places where the wood had split. The truth had cracked open the little piece she had rebuilt. Eli found her there, soaked and breathless. He knelt beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain drummed above them like a heartbeat. Finally, Clara said, "All my life men decided what I was worth. They took what they wanted and left me the rest. I never believed I could belong anywhere again." Eli's voice came low and steady. "You belong here as long as you choose to. What they did to you cannot name who you are." She shook her head. "You don't understand. That part of me will never come back." He looked at her, his eyes soft but sure. "Maybe not. But there's more to life than what was taken. You bring life to everything you touch. I've seen it with my own eyes." For the first time, she met his gaze. Raindrops slid down her hair and face, mixing with tears. He reached out slowly, careful not to startle her, and laid his hand over hers. Her fingers were cold, but did not pull away. He stayed that way until the storm began to ease. The thunder drifted to the hills, leaving only the sound of water running down the walls. When they finally stood, Eli helped her to his horse and guided her home. Clara had been forced to face her past, and Eli had seen her pain laid bare. The truth was cruel, but it had not destroyed what had grown quietly between them. When they reached the ranch, the light of the setting sun broke through the clouds. It touched the wet fields and made them shine like gold. Clara looked at the horizon, and for the first time she felt the faint stir of hope inside her chest, fragile but alive. The morning after the storm was quiet. The world smelled new, as if the rain had washed away the dust and sorrow that had clung to the ranch. The sun climbed slowly from behind the hills, turning the wet fields into silver. Clara woke with a dull ache in her chest, but her heart was not as heavy as before. She had cried until her eyes burned, and now there was nothing left but calm. Eli was already outside. He had barely slept. It stayed near her bunkhouse, keeping watch through the dark hours in case the sadness drove her to run again. When he saw her step out into the light, he gave a small nod instead of words. She nodded back. Between them lay a silence that spoke more than any talk could hold. They began the day's work side by side. The fences needed mending and the animals needed feeding. The rhythm of daily chores steadied their hands and minds. Clara worked harder than ever, as if motion could scrub away the hurt that still lived inside her. Eli did not stop her. He only made sure she ate and rested when she needed to. Sometimes their eyes met and lingered a little longer than they should, but neither looked away in shame. As days passed, the weight of what happened began to fade under the warmth of their quiet bond. One afternoon, Clara was walking toward the corral when she saw Eli helping a small calf caught in the corner of a fence. The animal struggled wildly, its leg tangled in wire. Without thinking, she ran to help. Together, they freed the calf and carried it to safety. The moment the calf found its feet again, Clara smiled wide enough to make Eli's heart tighten. "You watch over every living thing like it's part of you," he said. She looked at him and answered softly, "Everything that breathes wants to live, just like me." He wanted to say more, but stopped himself. The wind fluttered a loose strand of her hair. He found himself wishing she could see herself the way he did, stronger than any curse, softer than the empty plains. Weeks went by, and the season started to turn. The grass grew taller, and the river near the ridge started to swell. One evening, Clara was in the kitchen, stirring soup, when Eli came in carrying a broken chair. His hands were rough from work, but his eyes held that same careful gentleness. "Mind if I fix this here?" he asked. I smiled. "The table's free." He sat across from her, hammering nails while she stirred the pot. The smell of herbs and warm bread filled the air. After a long while, she said quietly, "Thank you for coming after me that day." He looked up. "You never had to be alone again." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't believe anyone meant that until you said it." They finished the meal in peace. Later, as night deepened, Clara stepped outside. She looked up at the stars. The sky was wide and endless, but instead of feeling small, she felt seen. She thought about how far she had come from being traded like property to standing free under a sky she could claim as her own. Eli came out to join her, carried a lantern but set it down at his feet. The two of them stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the night. "I used to think the land was cursed," he said. "Everything I tried to grow would dry up. Livestock would get sick for no reason. Then you came, and now life has come back. I don't believe that's chance." Clara turned to him. "You gave me a place to be safe. Maybe the land only needed peace." He smiled in that quiet way of his. A breeze lifted between them, carrying the smell of rain and grass. Spring entered gently. The fields turned thick and green. Calves were born, and the wind carried birdsong over the ranch. Clara began to laugh again, not the short, polite laugh of a servant, but the rich sound of someone rediscovering joy.
Ah.
She started humming each morning while making breakfast.
Ow.
Eli liked to stop nearby just to listen. One day, near the lambing shed, she called out for him. There was excitement in her voice. "Hey." He ran over, half worried something had gone wrong. But when he reached her, she was kneeling beside a small new lamb that had just been born. She held it close, her hand steady, her face bright with tenderness. "Look," she said. He made it through the cold. Eli crouched beside her and watched the tiny creature rest in her arms. For a long moment he did not speak. He was watching more than the lamb. He was watching her, realizing how her spirit had changed the ranch and his life. He looked around at the clear sky and the lively fields. The world had color again. The woman that everyone once called barren was now surrounded by new life. It was as if everything she touched learned how to breathe stronger. That night, Eli built a fire outside, and they sat together watching the flames rise. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Maybe this is what healing feels like." "Yes," he said softly. "This is what healing feels like." The moon rose high, lighting the land that now seemed filled with promise. The hurt of the past had not vanished, but something greater had grown in its place. There was still pain, but over it spread the quiet truth that love had found a way to take root in the very soil where despair once lived. A quiet year passed on Barrett Ranch. The fields stretched wide and golden under the sun, and the rivers ran full again. The air no longer carried sadness. Each morning, Clara woke before light and watched the sunrise spill across the horizon. She no longer felt like the frightened woman who had arrived bound in rope. She had grown stronger, her hands rough from work, but her heart ready to dream again. Eli had changed too. He no longer walked with the slow weight of loneliness. His smile came easier, his laugh deeper. People in the nearby town spoke about his ranch as if it had been blessed. They said no one had seen grass so green or animals so healthy in all their years. Some called it luck. Others whispered that the girl who could not bear children carried a secret gift. Eli did not care what they said. He only knew that Clara's presence had given him back his life. Winter came soft and cold. Snow covered the fields like a blanket, and the smoke from the chimney rose straight into the still sky. Inside the house, the two shared long evenings by the fire. They talked about planting more fruit trees when spring returned, talked about building new fences, about traveling one day to see the sea. In those talks there was laughter, but one evening Clara grew quiet. She pressed a hand to her stomach with a puzzled look. For days she had felt weak, dizzy, unsure what troubled her. Eli noticed and asked if she was ill. She tried to brush it aside, but when she fainted near the stable, he carried her inside in panic. He rode for the town doctor before sunset and brought him back through the snow. The old doctor examined her carefully. When he finished, he turned to Eli with eyes wide in wonder. "She is with child," the man said. Eli stared, not understanding at first. The words felt impossible. He looked at Clara, half afraid to hope. She lay on the bed, pale and trembling, staring back at him. "That cannot be," she whispered. "They said I could never be." The doctor shook his head. "Nature finds her own path, and miracles wear many faces." When the doctor left, Eli sat beside her in silence. Then he took her hand and kissed it. "You have given this land life," he said. "Now life has come to you." Tears filled her eyes. She could not stop shaking. "I'm scared, Eli." "I know," he said softly. "But you are not alone." The months that followed were filled with both fear and hope. Clara grew weaker at times, stronger at others. Eli watched over her at every step. The neighbors, when they heard, came with disbelief and gifts. Many said it was a sign of heaven. Others came only to see if it was true. They left speaking in low voices, their eyes full of wonder. As spring returned, the ranch began to bloom again. New calves and foals filled the pastures, and flowers lined the fences. Inside the house, Claire prepared for the child with quiet joy. She sewed small blankets by the window while Eli built a cradle from smooth pine. Every hammer strike echoed through the rooms like a promise. The night her labor began, thunder rolled across the sky. Eli stayed beside her, his hands shaking, though he tried to be calm. The midwife worked in steady silence, her brow wet with sweat. Hours passed before a thin cry broke through the storm. When Eli finally held the small baby in his arms, his heart nearly burst. The boy was tiny, fragile, his hair dark and soft. Clara looked at them both with tears running down her cheeks. Eli laid the child in her arms. She whispered, "He's perfect." All the pain she had carried, all the shame and sorrow that had once weighed on her heart, melted away as she looked at the child. For the first time she felt whole. The man and woman who had found each other among ruin now held proof that something good had survived it all. When the storm cleared, dawn came gold and quiet. Outside, the world smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. Neighbors who came later that day said the land never looked brighter. They said it was as if the earth itself was celebrating. Eli named the boy Samuel. The name meant asked of God. The name spread across the valley. And soon people from other counties visited the ranch to see the woman once called barren holding her son. They said her story gave them hope that no wound was too deep to heal, no curse too strong to break. Years later, people still told the story. They spoke of the rancher who bought a broken girl and found not just love but a miracle. They said that when the wind moved across Barrett Ranch, it carried a sound like laughter mixed with prayer. Eli and Clara raised their boy among the wide fields, teaching him kindness, patience, and courage. The land stayed green, the animals thrived. And every morning Clara would open the door and let the sunlight fall across her child's face. She often thought of the name she had once been called, the label that had stolen her pride. It no longer had power over her. Life had proved stronger. Standing at the edge of the field, she would whisper to the wind, not in sorrow, but in peace. In her heart she knew that love had rewritten everything. The woman they once sold as infertile had brought forth a story that would never die.